Thank you. Good morning. It's really wonderful to be here and such an honor. You know, I was here 6 years ago when the Institute started, when this initiative started, and now when I travel the world, everyone is talking about what Tec Milenio, Tec de Monterrey are doing and the amazing impact that it's having around the world. It's a real honor to be associated with this organization. However, there is a challenge in being, for me at least, in being invited back again and again. You know, so I've been here a few times. I've been to Mexico many times. I love coming here, whether it's for vacation, whether it's for work. And the problem is, the challenge is that many of you have heard me speak. Now, don't get me wrong. I can talk about different things every time. I have over 200 lectures. The problem is that I only have 9 jokes. And, you know, I was thinking as I was coming over, you know, what do I do with that? You know, it reminded me, so when my wife first came to see me, she said, you know, we'd been together for many years, and she came to see me speak, and she said, Tal, I didn't know you were funny. And I said, yes, I have not, well, I had 7 then. I have 7 jokes. And she said, you should bring that more to the house. So now this was pressure. So every day before dinner, I would go on Google and search for the funniest jokes and then tell my family those jokes. But it didn't work. Not even my kids laughed. And I decided to stick with my strength. So I apologize in advance. If I tell a joke you've heard before, I please ask you, just laugh, pretend, fake it till you make it. But I do want to talk to you today about what has been on my mind for the last 5 years, and something that I'm very excited to be working with Tec Milenio on, which is happiness studies. So this idea came to mind about 5 years ago when I was on a flight, one of those long transatlantic flights. And you know those states when you're on a flight and you're very tired, but too uncomfortable to fall asleep, and yet too tired to even read a book? So I was in that state, and suddenly a question came to mind. And here's the question. The question was, how is it that there is a field of study for psychology, for philosophy, for history, for biology, for geography, for medicine, law, education, you name it, and yet there is no field of study for happiness? Yeah, there is positive psychology, my field, but that's just the psychology of happiness. What about what philosophers like Lao Tzu or Aristotle have to say about happiness? What about what theologians, religion has to say about happiness? What about what biology and history and economics have to say about happiness? So I resolved then on that flight to become part of a group that creates a field, or rather an interdisciplinary field of happiness studies that will look at what William James calls the human life's chief concern, or what Aristotle calls the highest end, or what the Dalai Lama talks about as the goal of every human being. I decided to help create a field of study that looks at happiness from different perspectives, from different disciplines. And what I want to share with you is some of the things that I've been thinking about over the last 5 years. And I'm very excited also that soon we will offer, we meaning the Happiness Studies Academy, which I co-founded, and Tec Milenio will be offering a certificate program on the topic of happiness studies, looking from different perspectives at life's, what I've come to call, ultimate currency. So when we look at the field of happiness studies, the first thing is that we're facing a big, serious problem. Because there is a paradox. There is a paradox that is at play here. A paradox that is at play. I told you, right? I promised the paradox, and here you have it. And the paradox is as follows. So on the one hand, we have another paradox. We know that there are many benefits to happiness. For example, if you increase levels of happiness, you also increase levels of creativity and innovation. If you increase levels of happiness, you improve relationships, whether it's at work, whether it's at home. You increase levels of happiness even by a little bit. What you immediately find is increase in health, engagement. So happiness is a good investment, whether on the individual level, on the family level, on the organizational level, and university level. There are many benefits, and we want those benefits beyond the fact that it feels good to feel good. So that's one part, but there is another part. And this is research, and there's a lot of research on that as well, showing that actually thank you. There is actually harm in valuing or pursuing happiness. Meaning, if I get up in the morning and I say, I want to be happy. Happiness is very important for me. This is actually likely to lead me to less happiness. In fact, it's associated with loneliness and sometimes frustration. So we have a problem here. And the problem is that on the one hand, we're told, pursue it, it's good for you. You know, we have centers that promote happiness. That's on the one hand. But on the other hand, we're also told, actually don't really pursue it, because if you pursue it, it's a problem. You will be less happy. You will actually be more frustrated. What do we do about this paradox? And it really is a paradox. Here is the answer. The answer lies in, quite simply, indirectly pursuing happiness. In other words, breaking down happiness into its components and then asking, what can I do to pursue these components? Not happiness directly, because if I pursue happiness directly, it's going to hurt me. It's also going to hurt those around me. But if I pursue happiness indirectly, that is going to lead actually to more happiness. In the words of John Stuart Mill, those only are happy who have their minds fixed on some object other than their own happiness. In other words, focus on something else, on that thing which will lead you to happiness. Don't focus on happiness directly. Let me use a metaphor to explain this idea. A different metaphor. The metaphor is of sunlight. So let's say you pursue the sunlight, you go to the sunlight, and you look at the sunlight directly. What happens? Your eyes hurt. It's very difficult to look at the sunlight directly. However, what if you look at the sunlight indirectly, meaning you break down sunlight into the rainbow? And then you can look at the rainbow, enjoy it, pursue it. It's the same with happiness. Happiness is like the sunlight. It's too bright, it hurts. However, if you pursue happiness indirectly, look at the elements of happiness. That will contribute to your own happiness. Now, the question becomes, if there is a field of happiness studies, what are those elements of happiness? What are those parts? What are the colors of the rainbow when it comes to happiness? So I identified 5 of them, and this is based on research that is done within psychology. It is based on the research of philosophers like Aristotle, whom I see as the father of the field of happiness studies, and his co-father, Lao Tzu. If you look at East-West philosophy, psychology, theology, what you will find is that most of them revolve around the 5 elements of happiness. Here they are. The first one is spiritual well-being. Spiritual well-being. So can someone just control it for me? I will just put my hand up each time. Is that okay? Can we make that deal? Thank you. So the first one is spiritual well-being. Spiritual well-being is about finding a sense of meaning in life. It can be about religion, but it doesn't have to be about religion. It's also about being present in the moment. Then there is physical well-being. Physical well-being is about mind-body. It's about physical exercise. It's about nutrition. It's about sleep and touch, the mind-body connection. And then there is intellectual well-being, which is about curiosity. Research came out recently showing that people who are curious actually live longer. People who are curious and learn all the time are also happier. Then there is relational well-being. Relational well-being is about connection to other people. As I will talk about later, the number one predictor of happiness. And finally, there is emotional well-being. Emotional well-being is about dealing with painful emotions that arise and facilitating pleasurable emotions. Okay. Now, if you look at the first letter of each one of these elements, spiritual, physical, intellectual, relational, and emotional, you see the word spire. Spire means the highest point, the summit, whether it's of a building or of a life. I aspire to something. And this is a very fitting acronym for happiness. Spiritual, physical, intellectual, relational, and emotional. We attain happiness in our life. We find happiness when we indirectly pursue it, when we pursue spiritual well-being in terms of meaning, when we pursue physical well-being, for example, physical exercise, when we pursue intellectual well-being, we indulge our curiosity, relational well-being, as well as emotional well-being. And what I want to do now is introduce you to each one of these elements. I'll introduce you to each one of these elements and show you a sample, because this field is a huge field, as you can imagine. If you look just theology, what they have to say about happiness, or what history has to say about happiness, or of course, psychology has to say about happiness, it's a great deal. I want to take you through a sampler and show you some of the things that we can do, that you can do, to increase levels of happiness by indirectly pursuing happiness. And let me begin with spiritual well-being. When it comes to spiritual well-being, I talked about the sense of meaning and purpose, but what I want to focus on now is the sense of presence. The sense of present, being in the here and now, and basically about meditation. When it comes to meditation, there is a great deal of research, and I want to share with you one study. Some of you are familiar with it. This is a study by John Kabat-Zinn and Richie Davidson. Here is what they showed. They brought in a group of people like you and me and got them meditating on an 8-week course. Once a week they met, and then every day they were asked to meditate for 45 minutes. This was their homework. At the end of the course, after 8 weeks, they measured physiological measures, psychological measures, you name it. And here is what they found. As a result of an 8-week meditation course, they were not just happier, they were more resilient. They were not just more resilient, their brains actually changed over a period of 8 weeks. A happier brain rather than a depressed brain. Their immune system strengthened as a result of this intervention. This is quite remarkable. However, there was one other question that they asked them at the end of the 8 weeks. And the question was, how long did you actually meditate for between sessions? So they met once a week. How long did you actually meditate for during the week, between sessions? Now, there were some good students who meditated for 45 minutes a day. Great. There was also the teacher's pet who meditated for 50 minutes a day. But then there were also those who only meditated for 10 minutes a day or 15 minutes twice a week. Now here is the interesting part. That made no difference. all benefited equally. It didn't matter whether you meditated for 45 minutes a day or meditated for 20 minutes twice a week. You benefited from it as much. That didn't make sense because it goes against a lot of research that was conducted until that time. And then they understood what happened. You see, when you're participating in a meditation course, what are you told? You're told to be present, to be mindful, not just when you're sitting down, lotus position with your eyes closed. You're told to be mindful in whatever you do. So you are reminded, remember that word. You're reminded to focus on the here and now. And that's when you bring mindfulness to your everyday life. For example, there's a lot of research on listening. One of my colleagues, Osnat Buskilayam, has done research on the benefits of listening. So people who are listened to, youngsters who are listened to, grow up to be more confident adults. Employees in an organization who are really listened to, perform better, miss less days of work. But the benefits of listening is not just to the person who is listened to, it's also to the person who's doing the listening. Why? Because when you listen mindfully, you're meditating with all the benefits thereof. Or when you eat, you can be mindful. So I just participated in a retreat, on mindfulness retreat, and the teacher there had us eat a raisin, one grape, a raisin, for 15 minutes. So we first had to look at it, and he said, look at the different colors. It's not just brown. And then we had to smell it, and then we could put it in our mouth, but not chew. This guy was cruel. And then just one bite, and the different flavors that come out. 15 minutes, one raisin. Now, I don't recommend this as a daily activity. You know, you wouldn't get far in life if you eat like that. However, what if you introduce 10 minutes of mindful eating? And you know, especially you, with the rich, delicious cuisine that you have here, just 10 minutes of mindful eating. That's meditation with all the benefits thereof. Or when you're listening to a conference call. You know, we're all familiar with that. 20 minutes have gone by on a conference call and suddenly we hear our name. And then we say, oh, sorry, the line wasn't good. Can you repeat the question, please? We all know that's okay. But what if you bring 15 minutes of mindfulness to a call or a meeting? What a difference that can make. Mindfulness in everyday life. You see, spirituality is in the details. Spirituality is in the day-to-day experience. When you walk outside and suddenly notice a tree, or you're with your loved one and suddenly appreciate who they are, really see them, or really listening to them. That's where spirituality is. Yes, it can be in the church, temple, or anywhere else. And it can be in everyday life. Albert Einstein once remarked, there are two ways to look at the world. One is as if nothing is a miracle. The other is as if everything is a miracle. And if you connect to the here and now, to the present, regardless of what you're doing, you experience life as a miracle. You see, in the words of Thich Nhat Hanh, at any moment you have a choice that either leads you closer to your spirit or further away from it. At every moment we have that choice. I want to take us back, just quickly, to the very beginning of positive psychology. So it was founded by Marty Seligman and Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi back in 1998. In 1999, Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi published a paper, an academic paper, and the title of that paper was, "If we're so rich, why aren't we happy?" Levels of wealth are going up around the world, and yet levels of happiness are not. In fact, there's more depression, more anxiety. Why is that? Well, there are a few answers to that, but one of the answers that Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi, who asked this question, would certainly subscribe to is one given by Tara Bennett Goldman. Tara Bennett Goldman wrote the book Emotional Alchemy, and here is what she wrote. The richest banquet, the most exotic travel, the most interesting, attractive lover, the finest home. All of these experiences can seem somehow unrewarding and empty if we don't really attend to them fully, if our minds are elsewhere, preoccupied with disturbing thoughts. In other words, if we're not present to the experience, no matter how great it is objectively, subjectively, we will not enjoy it. She continues, by the same token, the simplest of life's pleasures, eating a piece of fresh baked bread, seeing a work of art, spending moments with a loved one, can be amply rich if we bring a full attention to them. The remedy to dissatisfaction is inside us, in our minds, not in groping for new and different outer sources of satisfaction. So many people live their lives looking for the answer to happiness, when the answer very often resides within, right now. In the wonderful book by Robert M. Pirsig, Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance, Pirsig writes, we so often say we're looking for the truth, and then the truth comes and knocks on our door, and we open it and we see it and we say, go away, I'm looking for the truth. Well, part of the truth, not the whole truth, but part of the truth of happiness is being present in the here and now. So that's an experience of spirituality in our everyday life, accessible to us with our choice. And then we move on to physical well-being. There's a lot of research on physical exercise, on nutrition, on touch, all these and how they relate to happiness. What I want to focus on now is a specific area connected to mind-body. And that is dealing with stress. Stress is a huge issue. It's a pandemic around the world. In the United States, levels of stress levels are skyrocketing. In China, levels of stress levels of stress are up. In Australia, they're dealing with a stress epidemic. Just look at some of the newspaper headlines from around the world about the impact of stress. Stress is talked about as the silent killer. Stress is talked about as impacting the workplace, schools, children, universities. What do we do about this stress? And the first question is, why is there such stress? And here is the answer. Because today we have to juggle so many more things. Life was simpler before we had access to technology, before it took over our lives. And we have to juggle things and we pay a price for it. I want to show you a video now. And in that video, you may have seen it. It's of a BBC interview with an expert on North and South Korea. And this guy's interviewed on BBC. And when you look at this interview, see if you can see yourself in it. See if you can see yourself in it.
Scandals happen all the time. The question is, how do democracies respond to those scandals?
And what will it mean for the wider region? I think one of your children has just walked in. I mean, shifting sands in the region. Do you think relations with the North may change?
I would be surprised if they do. Pardon me. Pardon me. My apologies.
What's this going to mean for the region?
My apologies. South Korea's policy choices on North Korea have been severely limited in the last 6 months to a year.
Now, we find this amusing because we can all connect to it. You know, hopefully not on BBC, but this is what our lives look like. You know, there is, if you go on YouTube, it's very easy to find this. You go on YouTube, there is another video right after this, which is actually a spoof about a woman being interviewed on BBC. You know, she's feeding her baby with a bottle, she's feeding another child, she's cooking, she's putting out a fire, and she's giving this perfect interview, and then her husband runs in, "Where are my socks?" So, women are a lot better at multitasking, but still, we all pay a very high price for it. And the price is stress. What do we do about it? I hope that by the end of this lecture, you will all feel a lot calmer as a result. You will all look something like this. The beers are outside, Hector, right? Yeah. So, do we want to get there? Can we get there? Here is the thing. You see, my colleagues and I and many others have done research over the last 20 years on stress. And what we found was something that was surprising to us. What we found was that actually stress is not the problem. That actually stress potentially is good for us. Think about this analogy. So you go to the gym and you lift weights. What are you doing to your muscles when you lift weights? You're stressing them, right? Now, is that a bad thing? No, it's a good thing because you lift weights and then 2 minutes later you lift the same weights and then 2 days after you go back to the gym and you lift weights again, day after day, and you get stronger. And then you take a break and you lift more weights and then you persist for 6 months, a year, and after 2 years of very hard work in the gym, you begin to look like me. Well, more or less. I hope a little bit more. So the problem is not the stress. What is the problem? The problem is when you go to the gym and you lift weights, and a minute later you lift more weights, and then more and more weights. And a day after you go back to the gym, and a day after that again. That's when the problems begin. That's when you get injured. That's when you get weaker rather than stronger. The problem, therefore, is not the stress. The problem, rather, is the lack of recovery. Whether it's in the gym physiologically or in the world psychologically. You see, we can deal with stress. We're very good at dealing with stress. We've done it throughout our history. So 5,000 years ago, the stress was running away from a lion. Today, the stress is getting in a quarterly report on time. We're good at dealing with it. The difference between 5,000 years ago and today, or even 50 years ago and today, is that in the past, there was more time for recovery. Whereas today, we're on all the time, and we pay a high price for this act. What healthy, happy, and successful people do. And again, we know that from studies in physiology and biology, and we know that from studies in psychology. What healthy, happy, and successful people do is that they punctuate their very busy lives with recovery. Whether it's recovery on the micro level first. What is micro level? Well, every 2 hours or so, take a 15-minute break. It could be for meditation. It could be for having a chat with a friend. It could be have a cup of coffee, a walk, or taking a lunch as a recovery, and not lunch while you're doing work at the same time. That's not recovery, that's simply more stress. Or going home and switching off so that you can have periods of recovery with your family or friends. Or going to the gym on a regular basis. One of the best antidepressants and anti-anxiety medicine. Go 3 times a week to the gym, work out. 30 minutes of running 3 times a week, or walking, or playing football. Or what do you think the best form of exercise is? 30 minutes 3 times a week. What's the best form of exercise? Sex? If you can go on for 30 minutes at aerobic pace, 3 times a week, then I'd like to talk to you after, if you don't mind. No, it's not sex, but thank you for suggesting this. Dancing. Why dance? Because when you dance, what you're doing is, first of all, you're moving, exercise. Second, you're usually smiling. Third, you have the posture, a happy posture. Fourth, you're also doing it usually with someone. Very similar to your choice, which is also contributes to well-being. But any form of exercise as a form of recovery from the crazy busy daily life. That's micro-level recovery. So, you know, one of my colleagues was invited by a New York trading firm. What they do there is they trade stocks, buy, sell, buy, sell. And he was brought in because many employees were leaving the organization. Why were they leaving? Because of the stress. Those who weren't leaving were getting sick often. So they brought him in to deal with the rising levels of stress. He comes in and gives a lecture very similar to what I just gave. Stress is not the problem is lack of recovery. At the end of the lecture, they're very happy. They said, we really like what you have to say, so what do we need to do? He said, here is what I'd like you to do. Every 2 hours during the day, I would like you to take 15 minutes off for recovery. They say to him, you're joking, right? He said, why? He said, because you know what can happen on the world markets in 15 minutes? We don't have 15 minutes. We have lunch and we're on the screen. He said, how about 5 minutes? They said, no. So he thinks for a few seconds and then he says, how about 30 seconds? They say to him, 30 seconds we'll give you. Quickly, what have you got? He said, here is what I've got. What I'd like you to do is every 2 hours, take 30 seconds off. Ideally, close your eyes, but you don't have to. During those 30 seconds, what I'd like you to do is take 3 deep breaths. So 5 to 6 seconds in, all the way down to your belly, and 5 to 6 seconds out. 3 deep breaths, that's all, 4 times a day. And make sure you do it, because the key here is consistency. And they started doing it, and that made a huge difference in their overall experience. Why? Because it shifted them from the fight or flight stress response to what Harvard Medical School professor Herbert Benson calls the relaxation response. You see, to become happier doesn't take radical steps, but it does take consistency. It does take reminders and repetition. Keep that in mind. Then there is also mid-level recovery. This is about getting a good night's sleep. There's a lot of research on sleep coming out of Stanford. There's research from UC Berkeley, from the University of California, San Diego, from UC Riverside. For some reason, all the research on sleep is being done in California universities. I don't know why, but anyway, important research. Then it's also about taking a day off. You know, even God needed a day off. There's an important message here for us mere mortals. People who take a day off, at least a day off a week, are more productive, more creative, and happier. And finally, macro-level recovery. J.P. Morgan, father of North American investment banking, said, I can do the work of a year in 9 months, but not in 12. I can do the work of a year in 9 months, but not in 12. Taking time off, vacation, relaxation, and what your vacation looks like may differ from what the next person's vacation looks like. It can be just lying on the beach, doing nothing. It may be spending time with family, friends, reading, climbing mountains. It doesn't matter. But we need those times of recovery, just like a racing car needs time, a pit stop to recover, or else the tires blow up and it runs out of fuel. And this shows the connection between mind and body. Because recovery can be of the mind and of the body, and it affects your psychology and it affects your physiology. 2 sides of the same coin. So moving on to intellectual well-being. You know, when I talk to people about happiness and I tell them physical well-being is important, they get it. When I talk to them about spiritual well-being, meaning, mindfulness, they get it. When I talk to them about relational well-being, they get it, and emotional well-being, of course, but intellectual well-being is a little bit more difficult to explain. What is the connection between intellectual well-being and happiness? So first of all, as I mentioned, curiosity. big part of happiness, big part of physical health, not just psychological health. Once again, an example of mind-body being connected. But there is something else, and that is deep engagement with text. What do I mean by that? You see, when I went to Harvard, the first course that I took there, this was before school even started. This was during freshman week. The first course was on speed reading, how to read quickly. Today, I understand that what was even more important then was to take a course in slow reading. Why is slow reading important? Why is deep engagement with text important, especially in today's culture? You know, the average amount of time that a person spends on a web page today is 7 seconds. And it's going down by the day. 7 seconds. What does this mean? It means that the neural muscles that we're exercising are click, 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 get an impression of the whole thing and then move on. It's not about deep engagement with a web page or with text. When my kids today watch children's programs from when I was a child, they get bored because it's not moving, it's too slow. So on the one hand, they're faster, they're on top of things. They can get a good impression of a lot of material in a short time. This is what you learn in speed reading. However, they're only exercising this muscle and they're not exercising the slow reading, deep engagement muscle. And that's a problem because it doesn't just apply to reading web pages or books. It applies to life as a whole. Let me give you 2 examples. So the first example is in business. I would often, when I was a kid, I would ask my parents, how is it that my great-grandparents were great business people? They didn't go to Harvard Business School, as I did. In fact, they didn't go to university. What they did was every day, they were very orthodox. They studied the Bible. Every day they would read, a paragraph in great depth and talk about it, hours and hours in the yeshiva, in the place of learning. And I asked my parents, how are they good business people? And the answer lies right here, because they deeply engaged with the text. And when you deeply engage with the text, you're exercising the muscles of deep engagement with life. And it helped them not just study those specific texts, it also helped them study a business deal or another person whom they were interacting with. And speaking of other people, it's not just for business, it's also for relationships. You see, one of the reasons why there is so much relationship hopping today is because people don't know how to engage deeply. Not just with the text, it applies to other areas, also with other people. Because if I go to a different web page every 7 seconds, my brain will need different stimulation every 7 seconds or every month or every night. And we won't be deeply engaged with another person. To know another person, to be with another person, means to know them deeply. Physically and psychologically, emotionally and intellectually. And this is one of the reasons why relationships are failing today, because children as well as adults don't cultivate their deep engagement muscles. Now, it doesn't just need to be in books, of course. It can be in art or in nature. So walking in nature and immersing yourself in it and studying the beauty around you, that's cultivating your intellectual well-being. Looking at a work of art and really looking at the work of art. Asking yourself, what is this bringing out in me? What does this mean? What a difference that can make in our lives. Tec Milenio, one of the projects that it's involved with is working with exhibitions. That's about working with art. This is about cultivating intellectual well-being, which is critical for happiness. Whether it's happiness at home, with your partner, or happiness in whatever work that you do. So intellectual well-being, an important way of indirectly pursuing happiness. And then, of course, we have relational well-being. Relationships are the number one predictor of happiness. Some of you may be familiar with the Harvard study, 75 years following Harvard grads as well as men from the community. 75 years from the age of 18 until most of them died. And what do they find? One predictor for both happiness as well as health. Relationships. Now, it doesn't matter what relationships. It could be relationships with their partner. It could be relationship with the extended family. It could be relationship with their friends at work. But they had good, intimate relationships. I recently came back from a 2-week tour of Latin America with Sura, the Sura group. And what we did for that tour is we did research. And the research was 30,000 people in Latin America, as well as comparing them to the US and comparing to Spain. And what did we find? We found what we expected. We found that Latin America is the happiest region in the world. That wasn't a surprise for us. We knew that. We know that Mexico is among the happiest countries in the world. We know that Colombia is among the happiest. We found also that El Salvador is among the happiest. No big surprise here. However, we broke down the data some more and we found something else which was very disturbing. So we broke it down to age groups and we found the age group of 18 to 34, 35 to 54, and then 55 and up. And what we found when we broke it down into age group was that the reason Latin America is still the happiest region in the world is because of the older generation. In fact, the younger generation is no happier than North America or Spain. Still happier than Asia, but not happier than North America or Spain. In Mexico, this is exactly what we found. Now, this is very disturbing because what it gives us is a picture of the past, present, as well as probably the future. And we asked ourselves, why? And we collected data, and we found why, and there were 2 reasons. The first reason was spiritual well-being. For a lot of them, it was religion. So many of the young generations have moved away from religion, but it's not just religion. It's also a sense of meaning and purpose. Today you ask, and this is research done by William Damon from Stanford, you ask youngsters around the world, what do you want to be when you grow up? What you will often hear from them is, I want to be rich or I want to be a celebrity. Now, that's fine as an ambition. That doesn't give people a sense of meaning and purpose, a deep sense of meaning and purpose in life. So spiritual well-being went down significantly between the young generation and the older generation. The second thing, relationships. Relationships were as important, in words, they were as important for the young generation. But what kind of relationships did they actually have in their lives? Virtual relationships. Exactly, not real relationships. And there was a very high price for that. 1,000 friends on Facebook are no substitute for that one BFF, best friend forever. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm not against social media. I'm not against technology. Today I'm speaking to many people around the world thanks to technology. Short while ago, I met my BFF from when we were 12 years old. Our parents moved countries. We didn't see each other since. Thanks to Facebook, we met after 35 years. My sister met her amazing husband through social media. It's great. It's great in moderation. Going back to Aristotle 2,500 years ago, everything is good in moderation. Or all that is good in moderation. One of the ways to cultivate real rather than virtual relationships is through giving. I want to share with you a study. Some of you are familiar with it, but it's worth repeating. This is a study done by Harvard Business School and the University of British Columbia, a joint venture. And here is what they did. They brought in a group of people to the lab, and they measured their levels of happiness. We know how to measure levels of happiness today, whether it's through fMRIs, brain scans, EEG, or through questionnaires. So they measure their levels of happiness, and then they give them a nice sum of money. And they tell them, go spend this money on yourself. And they did. And they go out and they buy themselves a gadget, or they buy themselves shoes, or whatever. So they spend it, and they go back to the lab. After shopping, they measure their levels of happiness. What do you think they find? Levels of happiness go up significantly. This is important research. This is the first time in recorded history when we have scientific evidence for Carrie Bradshaw's claim from Sex and the City that buying shoes makes you happier. This is important. I see some are laughing, others are about to cry. It's okay. Give yourselves the permission to be human. And then they go back to the lab a day later. What do you think they find a day later? Right back to where they were before. So one day there is a shopper's high, but then they go back to where they were before. So what's the conclusion from this research? That you need to buy shoes every day. Right. Some people are really crying now. Okay. Part 2 of this study. They bring in a group of people. Once again, they measure their levels of happiness. Once again, they give them a nice sum of money, the exact same amount. And once again, they tell them, go spend this money. Only this time they tell them, go spend it on someone else. And they do. And they go and this was in Harvard Square, there are homeless people there, they buy them meals. Or they buy their partner shoes. Or they give it to their favorite charity. It doesn't matter. And then they go back to the lab and they measure their levels of happiness. What do they find? Happiness goes up. To the exact same degree that it went up after shopping, with one very big difference. And the difference is, exactly a day later when they measure it, it does go down a little bit, but it's still higher than base level. You see the impact of giving a week after. One of the best ways of contributing to our own happiness is by giving, by helping others. Now, I mentioned that the field of happiness studies is not just about psychology. Well, we have this wisdom, the importance of giving, in theology for thousands of years. You know, my mother tongue is not English. It's my second language. My mother tongue is Hebrew, the language of the Bible. My favorite word in Hebrew is the word to give. In Hebrew, you would say it as Natan, N-A-T-A-N. Do you see anything peculiar about this word? Anything unique to this word? Exactly. It's a two-way, symmetrical word. It's a palindrome. This is ancient wisdom on happiness. Because when I give, I get right back as much, usually actually more than I give. Just imagine if every day you decided to be extra kind, extra generous, extra giving for 10 to 15 minutes. What a difference that could make in your life, in the life of those around you. Because when you give, you're not only helping others, you're also helping yourself. It's a virtuous cycle that you create. And I'd like to end by talking about emotional well-being. When we talk about emotional well-being, we're talking about pleasurable emotions. This is about cultivating pleasure through, for example, doing gratitude exercise on a regular basis. It's also about introducing pleasurable emotions in other areas. And here I want to draw on, once again, religion, theology. When it comes to bringing about lasting change, philosophers had it wrong, theologians, religion had it right. What do I mean? Socrates, considered father of Western philosophy, said, "To know the good is to do the good." To know the good is to do the good. Socrates was very smart, but in this case, he was wrong. Most of us know what is good. We know what is good to eat, what is good to do, how we should behave, even in stressful situations with our children or partner, but we don't always do what we know. To know the good is not necessarily to do the good. Where did religion get it right? Religion got it right because religion emphasizes three things: reminders, repetition, and rituals. The three R's: reminders, repetition, and rituals. This is why in religion you go to this, you hear the same words day in and day out. You say thank you for your daily bread day in and day out, not just once or twice. Because just knowing that you should be grateful is not enough. You need to do it over and over again. In religion, you have reminders on the wall, the murals. You have reminders in music, in song, in art. You have reminders in the scriptures that you read over and over and over again. Religion had it right, because if you want to attain the best version of yourself, it's not enough to just know what that would look like. You need reminders of what that would look like or be like. So reminders are a central part of the field of happiness studies. And here is one reminder that I want to share with you. In 1901, Helen Keller wrote an article which she called 3 Ways to See. This is your homework, your only homework from today. When you go home, go on Google, look for 3 days to see, print it out, and put it on your wall. This is the single best reminder that I know of how precious and important and meaningful life is. It's the single most important reminder that I know of to remind you of gratitude and the importance of taking walks in nature and reading books and observing a work of art. It's a reminder not just that will elevate your emotional well-being, but will elevate every element of the SPIRE model: spiritual, physical, intellectual, relational, and emotional. And every time you need a boost, just see it on the wall and read it, or read parts of it. It's not that long. And in it she writes about what she would do if she was given her sight for 3 days, if she was given her hearing for 3 days, how she would celebrate life. And in it she says, those who have eyes very often cannot see. Those who have ears cannot hear. Those who can touch do not feel. And that essay can teach us to see, to hear, to touch. It can remind us of the best version of ourselves. Helen Keller, the philosopher, one of the mothers of the field of happiness studies. But it's not just the pleasurable, it's also the painful that's important to deal with. One of the ideas that I talk about a lot when it comes to painful emotions is the permission to be human. The permission to be human is about allowing ourselves to experience every emotion, whether it's sadness or envy or anxiety or frustration. Because when we give ourselves the permission to be human, that's when we also open ourselves up to happiness. That's also when these emotions flow through us and go away. This is easier said than done. I want to share with you one last story about a student that I had. So my certificate program runs for a year. And in that program, there are 5 days at the beginning and 5 days at the end when we actually meet. And on the second time we met, so this was the end of the year, a student puts her hand up. She's sitting right in front, on my right. She puts her hand up, and I let her talk. Now, there are 200 people sitting in the room, and she says, you know, Tal, I'm a psychologist. She's a PhD in psychology. I treat people. I'm an expert on positive psychology. when I talk to people, I sometimes feel like I'm a fraud. I say to her, how do you mean? She says, I talk to them about happiness, about positive psychology, but I myself sometimes go into those dark places. And I feel like a fraud when I talk to them about happiness. I said to her, do you mind if I ask a question to the rest of the group? And the question that I asked was, please put your hand up if over the last 3 months you were in one of those dark places. There are 200 people in this room. 200 hands go up, including mine. And I said to her, just look around you. And she looks back and she smiles. And I say to her, look, we all go into those dark places. And what I often say is that there are only 2 kinds of people who don't experience painful emotions, like sadness, anger, frustration, anxiety. 2 kinds of people, the psychopaths and the dead. Exactly. So experiencing painful emotions, it's actually a good sign. And I'm telling this, and this is what we've been studying for a whole year. And I say, we all go through it. Just look around you. I experienced those dark places as well. But then I look at her, and I see something in her eye, and I say to her, you don't believe me, do you? You don't believe me that I go into these dark places? And she said, I don't. And this was a big aha moment for me in this field of happiness studies. It's fine if we experience it, but when we become experts, when I become an expert like my teacher, then I won't experience these painful emotions. And I say to her, I promise you, I'm not a psychopath and I'm alive. You can see I'm moving. We all go through into these dark places, and if we don't fully accept that fact, we're preventing ourselves from reaching our potential for happiness. You see, there is a paradox, and the paradox is that when we surrender to unhappiness, really surrender to it and say, this is just the way life is, it's a fact. When we surrender, that's when we actually win. That's when we actually fulfill our potential for happiness. In the words of Golda Meir, Israeli Prime Minister, those who don't know how to weep with their whole heart don't know how to laugh either. 2 sides of the same coin. So there you have it, a sampler of this fascinating, important, meaningful field of happiness studies. And there you have it, here in Tec Milenio, in Tec de Monterrey. You have some of the best scholars, some of the best work that is being done in this field. And around the world, where I lecture, people are talking about what's happening right here when it comes to introducing more meaning to the students' lives, when it comes to spiritual well-being, when it comes to introducing more physical health to the students' lives and the community, when intellectual well-being is important and deep learning is being done in this very university, when relational, interpersonal relationships are cultivated, and finally, where there is permission to be human, to experience the full range of human emotions, and ongoing reminders of the many things that we can be grateful for. Tonight, as every night, I will be writing down the things for which I'm grateful. And one of the things that I'm going to write down, as I write down very often, is the gratitude that I feel for Tec Milenio, for Tec de Monterrey, for bringing happiness to so many lives, for bringing happiness to life. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Thank you. Do we have time for questions? Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Tal. There are many, many questions, and I'm sure more of you have questions. So I'm going to summarize a group of questions that have to do with children, kids, students, and how to motivate them because we all understand here how important happiness studies are, but how do we motivate the whole spectrum, from those that are not interested to the high-achieving students? What would be your recommendation?
Good. So, you know, when people ask me, so what is the most difficult thing that you do in your life? My answer is raising children. It really is a challenge. It's especially a challenge if you have teenagers. But you know, one thing that I remind myself and also many of my clients and my students, I say to them, you know, if they have teenagers, I say to them, remember, there is research, actual research, which is cross-cultural. It's in Mexico, the US, Kenya, and Japan. Cross-cultural research that shows that teenagers are human beings too. And that's important to keep in mind, knowing that, you know, I have teenagers at home. So what do we do with them? The first thing to do is to lead by example. And I'll give you a few examples for that. You know, if I come home from work and I'm on the phone all the time and the phone is next to me when we're eating, that's not a good example. I need to disconnect so that I can connect to them. And then when I lead by example, then I can actually institute rules in the house. In our house, there is a rule. There are no cell phones in the house. So they're there, they deposit it in a safe location, and then we interact. They do play video games, they like it, and which is great. I think it's good for coordination in moderation. We have to set the boundaries, which is not easy. You know, there are more and more psychologists today who are speaking about us as the obedient generation. Why the obedient generation? Because we were obedient to our parents, and now we're also obedient to our children. Not good. Not good. Boundaries are important. A family is not a democracy. Yes, we need to listen to them and hear them, and we need to set very clear boundaries. And today, that is probably the most important thing when it comes to raising children. It's not easy, because they see other homes that are not doing it. And more parents, by the way, are getting together as groups now and are saying, we as a group, we will limit time on screen, let's say to 1.5 hours, which is reasonable, when children come to our house. The problem is if only in our house they're limited, they're not going to want to come to our house. And that's why you want a deal with other parents. So this is one of the things that's being done with parents. Or food. You know, don't just give them sweets all the time. You know, in moderation, it's good. But that has to be an agreement among parents. Parents have to unite in order to deal with the big challenges of raising children today.
The next group of questions talks about motivation, intrinsic and extrinsic motivation,
Good.
And in different contexts. And there's one specific person that wants to know how to deal with toxic environments.
Good. Yes, so motivation, which is very much also related to what we spoke about with children. You know, today's parents very often want motivation to be intrinsic. So if you want to do it, sweetheart, you can do it. And if a day later you don't want to do it, that's okay. So they put them in a football class, and then they have enough of it, and the next day they move to judo class, and the following day they move to robotics class. Now, it's good to expose our children to a lot of things. At the same time, there has to be an agreement which combines intrinsic and extrinsic motivation. So the intrinsic motivation, what sport would you have to do a sport, that's a given. What sport would you like to do? And they choose dance. And they do dance, and then the deal is you do it at least for a semester, because I paid for a semester. Now, if they want to stop after a month, then extrinsic motivation comes in. We have a deal. You have to continue. If next time you want to do basketball, that's okay, but then you also have to commit for a few months. Combining intrinsic, what do you want to do, but then sometimes you have to do it because you committed. Now, this is important because life is not just about intrinsic motivation. You know, I love what I do. I love the field of happiness studies. But it's not all intrinsic motivation. There are days when I wake up and I don't feel like writing texts for my lectures. Or there are days when I didn't feel like grading my students. But I had to, because it was part of the deal that I signed with the university. It was part of the deal that I made with myself. I want to create a course. It's a combination of intrinsic and extrinsic motivation. And here is interesting research on procrastination. Is it the same word in Spanish? So, procrastination is a huge issue. If I asked who has issues with procrastination, 80% of you would put your hand up, at least. And the other 20% should look deeper inside. Right? No, I'm kidding. So procrastination is a huge issue. Why is it a huge issue? Because there's also a lot of research on procrastination at the University of Carleton. This is in Canada. They have a procrastination lab. I don't know how they get any work done, but they have, it's a little bit like the sleep research, you know. Anyway, but the research is very interesting, and one of the things that they show there related to motivation is that procrastinators live under the illusion that inspiration precedes motivation. That you first have to have inspiration, and then motivation, and then action. Inspiration leads to motivation, leads to action. Wrong. People who don't procrastinate understand that this is not the relationship. That very often we're not inspired to do things or motivated. Their equation is the opposite. Begin with action, and that action will lead you to being motivated and ultimately to be inspired. And to start with action, you need the extrinsic motivation. So when you get up in the morning and you need to do the work, just start doing it. And through just doing it, that will lead to motivation and inspiration. So sometimes first extrinsic motivation will lead to intrinsic motivation.
Thank you so much, Ta. There's one last set of questions that has to do with mindfulness and the relationship between mindfulness and spirituality.
Good.
If you could elaborate.
Good. I'm happy to elaborate on it. So I spoke about the importance of mindfulness and all the research on it. And then many people come to me and say, so Tal, this is the answer to happiness. It's simply about mindfulness, just being present. And in many ways, this is very much an Eastern approach. So in the East, they talk about mindfulness, they talk about being present. Whereas in the West, we have the opposite approach. It's about the future, it's about goal setting. And they ask me, so which school are you? Are you more the mindfulness present or the future? And my answer is yes. How is it yes? How is it both? And this is where spirituality comes in. So remember, spirituality is about being mindful, being present, and it's about doing something that is meaningful for you, the future. This is where spirituality resides. How is that? You see, if I don't have a goal, if I don't know where I'm going, then I'm likely to get lost. I'm less likely to be happy. I may fall off a cliff because I don't know where I'm going. I may be lost. Think of those periods in your life when you didn't know where you were going or what you wanted to do. They're not necessarily the happiest periods in our life. On the other hand, if we're only in the goal and thinking about the future, then we're not enjoying our life. Then we're in the rat race, and that's a problem. How do we combine the two? It's about having a goal, and once we have that goal, letting go of it. Because if I have a goal, I want to get into that summit there. I can just enjoy the journey on my way there. You see, achieving goals is not that important for happiness. Yeah, it will lead to a high, just like buying shoes leads to a high. But then very quickly we go back to where we were before. Achieving the goals is not important for happiness, not long-term happiness. What is important for happiness is having goals. Because when we have goals, that's when we are liberated to enjoy the journey. And that is how mindfulness, being present, is connected also to the future. Now, the interesting thing is also when we have a goal and we let go of that goal and we're focused on the present, that's when we're most successful, not just happiest. You see it on the organizational level. Organizations that have a clear sense of meaning and purpose, a future goal, a 2030 goal. These are also the organizations that inspire their employees and where the employees enjoy the present most often. I mentioned Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi's work on flow, on being present. One of the antecedents, one of the elements that are important for experiencing flow is having a challenging goal, wanting to achieve something. So it's wanting the future to liberate us to enjoy the present. And the more moments we spend in that present, on our way towards our destination, the happier we are.
Thank you so much, Tal. This is all the time we have.
Thank you very much.